enjoy parenting. I think we're going to start today with some questions that came in via super chat last time that I neglected. Sorry, I'm just getting used to the format here. But I love the question, so I want to make sure we addressed it today.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's our first mailbag episode.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the first question was, assuming you show all your children love and cater to their needs, is it ever appropriate to have a slight favorite child? And does the principle apply differently depending on the ages of the children? I have a couple thoughts that I'll share, and then I'm interested to hear what you have to say about it too. Yeah. So the first thing, when I read this question, the first thing that occurred to me was that I wondered whether reformulating the question might be helpful, because what I wonder is whether have a slight favorite child just means identify psychologically more with one of your children than the others, because I think that is an inevitable phenomenon, that if you have multiple children, one is going to be more like you, one might be more like your spouse, one psychologically might not be anything like either of you. And then that can take an adjustment to figuring out kind of a natural rapport with someone who's so dear to you, but you don't kind of look at the world exactly in the same way. And that thinking of it that way, it feels less like a crime, I think, than favorite child does. Just to think of it as, well, this child, it is similar in kind of what our souls are made of. And so I have an easier rapport with this child. And in my experience, that is an inevitable fact. So evading it is never going to be helpful. Yeah. You're going to relate more at any given point to one child than another. But also, I think it's at any given point, I think it changes over time, depending on their developmental stages. So that would be my first thought, is just to think of it as I connect more easily with one of my kids because of their nature in relation to mine, but not I like them better. And maybe that's a little easier to take psychologically about yourself than to think that you're choosing a favorite.
Yeah, I think that anything I have to say is essentially the same as what you're saying, that it's the key here is not equality among the kids, but honesty with all the kids, that you want to make sure that your relationship with them is as honest as it can be. And so, you know, if let's suppose that there's one child that is just breaking all the rules and is causing a lot of headaches and is keeping you up at night, and another child that has no trouble whatsoever, and there's no benefit from saying like, well, I need to make sure that I am an even keel but for both of them. No, you should react differently depending on the reality of the child. And that means that, you know, you might find that there's one child that likes all the same hobbies that you do. So it's very easy to, you know, watch TV shows with them and that sort of thing. And that's fine. And then the other one, it's a little bit more foreign, but be honest about that and then try to achieve the best that you can with them and figure out what you're going to relate to them about. It's not going to make any situation better to, like, I'm not very athletic. And if one of my children's is just a sports nut, and then the other one likes musical theater, it's not going to do me any good to pretend I'm just as happy at a football game as I am in the theater. First of all, they're going to know. And second, like, it doesn't make the experience any better. So you just have to relate to them as honestly as you can.
Yeah, well, that connects well with the other thought that occurred to me, which is that how much love you feel is going to fluctuate a lot moment to moment. You're not walking through your life conscious at every second of how much you love your child, or any human being in your life for that matter. So your love for your child is something that kind of exists deep within your soul and becomes activated in your consciousness more or less at different times of your life. So I was recalling an experience I had with my little brother, who used to drive me insane. We had a very contentious, very adversarial relationship for a lot of our childhood. And then I remember at one point him feeling like he was in danger in some way. And what came out of me in that moment was the most primal form of attachment you can possibly imagine. It was like, nothing can happen to this boy. He is my brother. I mean, it was just an intense, overwhelming feeling of love. And I think that's what, that's what's lurking in the background of most of our relationships. So the other thing I wanted to say is that this question of, is it okay to have a favorite? Well, probably faced with that situation of feeling like either of them was in danger, you would give your life to save them. That's the level of intensity of attachment and love you have for that child. And what you're describing is the kind of superficial day-to-day interactions. Some are more pleasurable than others. Now, it could be more complex than that if you've got a child who's really going through troubles or, there's some sort of trauma in some way. But generally, there's that deep, substantive, I'd give my life for you love. And then there's the day-to-day interactions that exist on another plane. So if that's the case, then I think that too kind of relieves you of the burden of guilt of feeling like you have a favorite, because if the context is I'd die for both of them, but I like hanging around with one of them better. And we have the same interests, that doesn't feel quite as bad.
Maybe there's something that we're missing in the word favorite, though. It could be taken two ways. One meaning like, which one do you feel more pleasant around? Like, which one would you like to run into at a cocktail party or something like that? Or maybe what favorite means here is like, I allocate more resources to that one or something like that. Or like I pay more attention to them, or like, this is probably not what the person meant, but like, let's suppose that you have two cookies and there's the kid that you find more pleasant, so you give them the bigger cookie. Like there would be something twisted in that. And that would not be appropriate, but I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt that they're just saying like, I find myself enjoying time with one child more than another, and I feel conflicted about it. And to that we say, let yourself off the hook and just try to have an honest relationship with them. But
implied in what you're saying is, if you do find yourself finding an easier rapport with one of your kids, you do want to make a conscious effort to make all of your kids feel visible in your eyes, make them all feel loved, make them all feel like you are intensely interested in them, whatever their interests might be. And to that end, you can kind of follow along and let them spark interest in you. Seth was my first boy, and prior to Seth, Formula One and rockets had zero interest to me. But I'll now watch rocket launches and cry, and I get up at 5 a.m. every Sunday with him and watch the Formula One race. So he's introduced me to a new world. So it can be an opportunity to follow their lead and find ways to form those connections that weren't natural to you.
Yeah. Then the wisdom of that you think someone's your favorite right now, but you have no idea what the next month or year or decade is going to hold. New connections can form when you least expect it. You kind of have to, it's like the wisdom of Solon from ancient mythology or ancient history, that you can't count someone as lucky until they're dead, which is a grim way of putting it, but you don't really know how you're going to feel about your children in the future and the new connections and new veins of value that you're gonna mine with them as time goes on.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so we had another comment last week that leads well into a topic of discussion you and I wanted to return to. The comment was, thanks for your insights about teens going to peers instead of parents. It challenges me about how connected I am with my 15-year-old daughter. So the book was, oh gosh, what's the title? Hold on to your kids. Hold on to your kids. So that's one that I mentioned last week as introducing this fascinating thesis that one of the problems that kids are facing today is that they are more connected to their peers, more oriented to their peers than they are to their parents. And this unmoors them in important ways that are psychologically troubling to them. So I know you've picked up the book since then, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts about it so far.
Well, so I'm only about 3 chapters in, and I'm at about the same phase that you were before, where it's a really interesting thesis. It does seem to map onto some things that I've observed independently, but I'm really waiting for this person to develop a model of attachment and what works and what doesn't, and what the history in Western countries has been like that led to this peer attachment. I'm waiting for that model to really come together. So I haven't read enough to say definitively, oh yeah, this is great, here's what's good about it. But what I thought might be fun is that if you and I try to finish it in a few weeks, like 3 weeks, and we can invite any of our viewers to kind of have a little informal book club with us, that they can read it too if they want to put in their questions about this book, and our episode in 3 weeks can just focus on that book and the pros and cons and that sort of thing. So I hope that we can pull. You and I are both really busy, but I think I might be able to squeeze it in.
I think so too. I listened to it on Audible, and I find that it works just fine on 1.5 speed. So I should be able to get through it pretty quickly. But part of the desire for the 1.5 speed is I do feel like it's taking a long time to get to the sort of prescriptive advice that you're talking about. So if it's really important that kids have this orientation to their parents, how do you achieve that? How do you achieve that culturally? And then more important probably for us, how do you achieve that given the restraints of current culture? Because there are certain things that they claim are at odds with that sort of attachment that would have to be overcome to establish that sort of attachment. So it's an interesting question. But one thing I thought I'd share in anticipation of what they might suggest are ways to achieve this is that in reflecting, I noticed some things about my relationship with my 2 eldest children. They're now 22 and 20, and I have a very good relationship with them and always have. And they, I think, have been, at least as described by this book, more parent-oriented than peer-oriented. And I realized a couple of things I had going for me, which were reassuring because they almost seemed like problems at the time. So one was they obviously attended VanDamme Academy, small private school, not necessarily in the neighborhood where they were living. So playdates, relationships with peers were something that had to be scheduled and orchestrated and planned. They couldn't just constantly go out in the neighborhood and play with friends. Now, being someone who grew up in a suburban neighborhood in Texas where I played with my friends in the neighborhood all the time, that always troubled me that they didn't have that. And I'm sure there would have been wonderful benefits to that. But what it did for us is it kind of preserved the sacred time of home in the afternoons. When they came home in the afternoons, we were spending time together. And that allowed us to cultivate that close connection. And then if there were things that had happened to them during the school day that they needed advice or processing or a warm and listening ear, they would come to me for that instead of talking to their peers about it. It was also, they're old enough, I'm old enough, they're old enough that it was pre-cell phone. They maybe got some kind of cell phone when they were teens, but it wasn't like the omnipresent device that kids have today. They go to school with me. They went to school with me every day. So that created the advantage of being able to be a presence in their life and somebody that they could come to all the time. That was just very lucky for me. And then also, they didn't go to high school. That was kind of a very difficult decision, and sad for them that they didn't get the normal high school experience and have the kind of social experiences that we all identify with the high school years. But that too, they both opted out of high school after their sophomore year, took something called the California High School Proficiency Exam, and then took classes at the community college. So that too meant I was an anchor for them all the time. They didn't have this constant peer interaction that would be the place they go all the time for validation and security and to run their problems by.
Yeah. Well, so there's a lot to unpack in all of that, and I feel reluctant to do it prematurely without reading the book. But one of the things that you picked up on is or that was in your answer that was going to be part of my advice to this comment is that making sure that there are some meaningful family structures in your day.
Yeah.
Like I was going to recommend family dinner or things of that variety, family breakfast, so that there's times that you are regularly with each other, no devices, that sort of thing. And that's something that you were largely able to achieve. Now, the uniqueness of being a daughter of Lisa VanDamme is that really the entire structure of their universe was more or less designed by their mom. And so not everyone has that same benefit, but that's seems to be what you are overall trying to achieve with getting parental attachment instead of peer attachment, is making sure that a lot of the institutions in their life are communicating the values of the parents. But it's another thing that's hard is that it's hard to answer questions that deal with teenagers, because when we're talking about teenagers, the history of the teenager becomes really, really important, and we don't have that in the comments and questions. So I think that we're going to have to kind of punt giving a more detailed answer to this until a little bit later, and we can try to incorporate the ideas from this book.
Yeah, but I think so. What you're saying is that to the extent you can, carving out sheer time for the family, for attentiveness to family, where you're not connected to the world outside of you. My daughters currently attend a school where smartphones are not allowed. They can have a smartphone, but they have to keep it in their, this well, but they have to keep it in their room. And there's no Wi-Fi on campus. What's that?
We should be clear. This is your college age children.
They're my college age children, right? So they have to keep their smartphone in their room. There's no Wi-Fi on campus. They're not supposed to be going onto the internet for anything at any time while they're on campus. So they both very much like this policy. They think that it really serves the purpose of promoting their focus on real connected social relationships and on the curriculum itself, which is the goal of this policy, one of the goals anyway. And so when they come home, they have started suggesting that we have a foyer rule for the phones. You have to leave your phone in the foyer. And if it's not that you can't ever go use it for something, but if you want to use it, you have to walk away from whatever is happening and go to the phone. So it's a more deliberate choice as opposed to just habitual pulling it out of your pocket because you have it there. So I think that's a great policy, and it would be something I would encourage parents of teens to try, introducing these things. You have to do it. And you
don't need a foyer to do it. You can just pick any part of your house to put the phones in, just so long as it's away from where you are.
Yes. Foyer rule has a nice ring to it, though. So
it does. Yeah.
Just call it the foyer. All right. Should I move on to other questions that we've collected over the past couple of weeks? Okay, I'm going to read this question in its entirety because I think it's long, but it's asked in a very adorable way. So let's do it. It says, how much should I intervene with my daughter's language acquisition, particularly pronoun usage? She will only use object pronouns, me, him, her, us, them, etc., such as me want this or us go to the store, him like that cookie. Most of her language progress has been organic, but she seems to understand the proper words before she commits to using them. For example, she had workarounds for using the K sound, which she can't do. So she would refer to cows as moos and cats as meows, etc. She knows we use I, we, he, and she. And so she will, and she understands this when we do. So she will sarcastically say, I want a cookie when pressed to say I. She seems to think that English grammar is dumb and that she's found a better way of doing it. Will she relent? I love the ending to that.
Yeah, will she relent?
So I'm tempted to just say yes and move on.
Yeah.
But I think we can say a little more than that.
Yeah, never.
I know you're in the same position, so you can speak to it right now.
Yeah, my child is about half the age. He's almost 2.5, and he says, he switches first and second person pronouns. So he says, like, you want a cookie when he's talking about himself. But he will relent and eventually. I've never encountered an adult that just does that unless it's an obnoxious affectation that's cultivated for weird reasons. But I don't think you need to live in fear that this will never be broken. But my first thought with this is, it's a bit humorous, but remembering that Ellsworth Toohey quote, don't try to understand a folly, but understand what it accomplishes, or something like that. Or well, the one that I'm talking about from the Fountainhead, when you see a mistake. Oh gosh, I'm butchering the quotation. It's so terrible.
Okay, maybe someone can tell us in the comments.
Yeah. And so looking at that, and instead of saying like, why is this happening? Where did this come from? Instead say, well, what does it accomplish? And I think my guess is that it would achieve getting attention. That doing this sort of, I don't think that what they need is grammatical training, and probably they don't need a speech pathologist. I can't diagnose that. I think that this is probably something that gets them more attention. Kids do what works, and what does this work to do? Well, it becomes a funny thing. They get a big reaction. Like my 2.5-year-old right now cannot stop slapping my wife in the face. And he does it, he doesn't understand that he's being very obnoxious and hurting her. He just knows that when he wants to go to sleep, or when he needs to go to sleep and he wants stimulation to stay awake, this is the easiest way to have a very stimulating time, is to slap myself or my wife. And so he's doing that because it works. And I don't need to give him anger management classes. He will relent. He will eventually figure out that he can go to sleep without trying to overstimulate himself, or he can find more productive ways to stimulate him. And what we've decided to do is just have as stoic a reaction to that as we possibly can, so that he's not getting what he wants out of it.
The first thing I thought to advise, which I think this person is probably doing already, but it's good to make it explicit, is speak properly in front of them at all times. It's a real pet peeve of mine when people respond to their children's baby talk with baby talk. Modeling, I mean, it's not that you can never coo and make, cutesy noises with your very small children, but you do want to model proper speaking for them, so that that's what they adapt to and absorb. And I had a story about my eldest from when she was really little that was so staggering to me, and it really taught me this lesson once and for all. We had these pictures of her cousins, and their names were Marcy and Kathy. And I showed these pictures to her. She had never met these cousins before at that time. And she was at the stage that she repeats the first syllable twice, as opposed to, so she knows it's a 2-syllable word, but she can't say both syllables. So I said, this is Marcy and Kathy. And she said, Mar and Kat. And that's how her grandmother became known as Gran, because it was the same stage. So Mar and Kat were what they were called. Put the pictures away. Had no more exposure to these cousins. Had never mentioned the names again. We encountered the pictures a few months later, and she looked at them and said, Marcy and Kathy. So it was stored in her brain as Marcy and Kathy, but just for whatever reason, developmentally at that time, she was not able to produce both of those syllables. And that was so interesting to me, because had I followed suit and started calling them Mar and Kat, and, again, that specific doesn't really matter, but just as a general principle, echoing their childish attempts at language, I wouldn't be modeling the proper way to speak. So that's the only thing I would say is, whatever she says, you say it correctly, and eventually she's going to relent, and she's going to pick up the proper formulations.
Yeah. I love that phrase. Will she relent? I'm going to keep that around.
Yeah.
Let's move to our next one.
Yeah, sure. One other thing on that subject. Wait, I think I had one more thing. Just the child's tendency to generalize rules of grammar is an amazing feat of abstraction and accomplishment. And I think kids' overgeneralization mistakes of grammar are some of the cutest things that they do and say. So I think once made a video about, again, Lana, when she was little. We were walking down the street and there was a stroller sitting on the sidewalk with nobody in it. And she said, "Mommy, that's somebody's stroller?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Who bodies is it?" So she just made up the word who body, but generalizing from the pronoun usage that she was familiar with. And those are always entertaining, adorable, and also show that they're reaching a point of development that they can make these abstractions and make these generalizations. They just make them wrong because the English language is weird and the patterns are not consistent. So just remember that about her little cute ways of formulating her own grammar too.
Yeah, you'll probably miss them when they're gone.
Right, exactly. Okay, let's see. The next question was how to enjoy evenings with family, someone asked. We have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, balancing personal time with spending time together, but even more finding ways to spend time together. Got thoughts? Want me to start?
Yeah, why don't you get started on this one, because my concrete experience is different than what this person's asking about.
Okay. Well, one thing that occurred to me actually with an answer you were giving before is to make sure that you are that your definition of spending time together is broad, that it doesn't have to be you're doing an activity together where you're all mutually focused on it and it's a thing that you're doing. Merely existing side by side, whatever's happening, as long as you're not in your own universe, which having this on you can cause, but not feeling like there's any pressure that you're specifically doing something together. So if your definition is broad enough to include very mundane side by side kind of experiences where you're maybe doing some things independently, but still paying attention to each other and coexisting, but not so broad that you're all, isolated. You're in the same room, but you're all isolated in your own activities. And phones are the greatest danger for that. That might help take a little bit of the pressure off of the person asking that question.
Yeah, I can think of kind of 3 categories of activities, like one being the cell phone activity where you're doing something by yourself and there's a very high threshold for people to make contact with you. Then on the other extreme is like, I don't know, a Von Trapp sing along where everyone is together in doing an activity unified as one. But then there's also
wearing the same dresses.
Yeah, wearing the same dresses. Then in the middle, you have like people might be doing some parallel play, but the boundaries to playing together are not that high. So just like a tableau you could paint is one child is playing with some blocks, the other one is reading with dad, and then mom is I don't know, doing some dishes or something like that. So the people are independent, but the possibility of like spontaneously something coming together is possible. The 1-year-old could, summon over the mom to do something, or
the one building blocks can say, "Look what I created," and you can give them,
So it's enough that you're together and the barrier to interconnection is low. You don't have to require interconnection all the time. Otherwise, you'll have to be like Maria Von Trapp and plan outings every single night of the week, and so that there's always something exciting going on. And it's also, if you have that lower expectation of just allowing parallel play with low barriers to entry, that gives some breathing room for the children to invite you into things, for them to say, Daddy, can you build blocks with me, and that sort. And so that can be a very special, precious thing to give the child some breathing room to set the agenda for what the family does together.
Yeah. And I know we're out of time, but that just the last thing I want to say about that is that means building in time that you're not busy. And also maybe even building in time to be bored. This is a big topic, but it's something you and I talk about a lot. Just building in time where, okay, what we're doing is coexisting as family whatever that's going to look like. There's nothing specific planned, but there's nothing specific, and there's nothing specific tearing me away from this time. This is the time this is family time, whatever that ends up looking like.
Yeah.
And I think it is, we are all notoriously busy right now. There's so many competing demands for our attention. So I think that is an important way to make sure that those bonds are established.
So put the cell phones in the foyer and get bored. That's
bored. There you go. That's our advice for enjoying parents. All right. I think we're out of time, but we will move over to Clubhouse for anyone who wants to join us there and continue the conversation.
All right. I feel like we need to come up with some witty line to close out these episodes. I'll work on that for next time.
You are the king of the witty lines. I'll leave that to you.
All right. Bye-bye.